IVM.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila Institution. We're a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring a fresh perspective to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to another episode of All Things Policy. I'm your host Shrikrishna Upadhyaya, and to talk about local reservation in private sector with me today is Saurabh Todi, my colleague at Takshashila Institution and a research analyst. Welcome to All Things Policy, Saurabh.
Thank you, Shri. Happy to be here.
So Saurabh, this topic is in the news recently because the Punjab and Haryana High Court delivered a good judgment earlier this week where it struck down a law passed by the state government of Haryana. This law provided 75% reservation for locals in all companies and industries within the state of Haryana. It also said that this reservation will apply to any job which pays less than or up to rupees 30,000. So this was found to be unconstitutional by the High Court, and the High Court has given out a good judgment, which we'll go into much detail today. But what are your sort of broad thoughts on this issue of local reservation and its litigation?
Thank you, Shri. I mean, I am personally quite happy that this law has been struck down. This law was not very well thought out at all. And even, I mean, India again is one country, and freedom of movement, especially for employment, is an essential part of the rights that are granted under Constitution. So I think, and this creating these artificial barriers with between states for employment, I think really goes against basic common sense and also economics, right? Because
Exactly.
Always, I mean, there are migrant labor from kind of resource and more populated states feeds into the factories and establishments of more developed states, and this is kind of a pattern that is there. And then in due course of time, the aim is that there will be an equilibrium, and then this inequality will be kind of balanced.
Correct.
So this was a horrible law, to be very honest, and I'm quite happy that this has been struck down, and hopefully this would kind of stop this law or laws like this to go ahead in many states, because at that point, if you remember, many states started to implement this law, or at least they started the process too. So yeah, not a good law, and happy that it is struck down.
Right. Yeah, I believe this can have ripple effects because similar laws, like you pointed out, have been passed in Maharashtra, Karnataka, and Andhra Pradesh. In Karnataka, at least it's on hold. It's not been implemented yet. But definitely this High Court judgment is going to act as a warning to state governments before proceeding with the local reservation in the private sector, right? So anyway, let's look at and I think I'm glad that you pointed out this was not just a constitutionally invalid sort of a piece of legislation, but also it did not make any economic sense. It was not based on economic principles surrounding migration of human resources and overall socio-economic development of the country and so on. Anyway, having said that, the law in question today, just to set the context, I'll please bear with me for the next couple of minutes where I'll go into the details of the law and the judgment given by the High Court. So the law in question is the Haryana State Employment of Local Candidates Act of 2020. This has two requirements, which says that every employer shall maintain a register of all the employees who are earning less than 30,000 rupees per month. And then every employer shall also employ local candidates in such posts, right? Now, who are local candidates? The law says these are the candidates who are domiciled in the state of Haryana. Now, Haryana has another law called Pehchan Act, which gives Pehchan cards for all the local residents of Haryana. So the domicile aspect of it is defined under that act. Let's not go into that a bit of detail here. For our discussion today, it is sufficient to understand that this law requires local candidates to be employed in private industries and companies. So what is sort of the conflict this law brings about against fundamental rights? Now, Article 19 talks about the right to move freely throughout the territory of India, the right to reside and settle in any part of the territory of India, and of course, the right to practice any profession or to carry on any occupation, trade, or business, right? Now, of course, the same Article 19 provides some reasonable restrictions which can be placed on these rights in the interest of general public. So the question before the High Court was essentially whether the restrictions which this sort of law places on migrant laborers as well as the employers who are engaged in business and occupation, whether these are reasonable restrictions and whether they can be justified under the Constitution. High Court has resoundingly answered no. They have said that this law clearly infringes the right of trade, occupation, and business guaranteed by the Constitution of India. And a side note here, it is very unusual, and it's not very often that we get laws which we get decisions of the courts which sort of strike down laws for violating the right to occupation and business, because economic freedoms in India are sort of not much much litigated upon, and even when done so, the courts have not been very in favor of protecting and upholding the rights. Having said that, what else did the court say, right? The court said that the whole idea of having a designated officer who is going to keep a record and track of all the employees who are sort of working in a particular company or industry, the requirement that employers have to submit quarterly reports to this government officer, and also this government officer has the right to inspect any premises, etc. All of this rings of Inspector Raj, and I'm glad that the court is sort of alluding back to the bad days of Inspector Raj, which sort of was, contributed to the unease of doing business in the country. And having said that, the court also says that, there is this law which provides a particular exemption. It says, one of the sections of this law says, in case skilled laborers are not available in Haryana, they can make an application for exemption. And another government, Babu, will decide on the application whether this exemption can be granted and for what duration and so on, which is also quite problematic, because this is like, having a super HR who's going to decide who is allowed to work in a factory or not, right? So something to that effect. So the court has not seen this favorably. They said all these restrictions have a very far-reaching effect and cannot be held to be reasonable restrictions. So they are not protected under the reasonable restrictions clause. So they need to be struck down. So this is sort of the short summary. Of course, the court has also dealt in about some aspects of equality and domicile, and whether domicile can be a ground for discrimination and so on. But on those counts as well, the court has sided with the petitioners, who are the industry bodies who challenged this law, and said that this entire aspect of local reservation in private sector is unconstitutional. So I'll stop here. It's been a long chat, long rant, I believe. So Saurabh, does this make you happy? I'm sure it does.
Yeah, I mean, to be very honest, I mean, just take a step back, right, and see, how kind of harebrained this whole idea is. And it is one thing to kind of have this on the fringes of people talking or policy, but it is quite another to see this at least being tried and to be implemented. And you see, for example, like, you have one person who now has the authority to go and inspect every possible establishment, whether and see whether they are in violation of the law or not. Just the amount of power that places, and given India's history and realities, as everyone knows, this is just another opportunity for rent seeking.
Correct.
This is not going to help anyone. This will disproportionately affect small businesses, which would most likely are supposed would be local businesses or small and medium
No, in fact, this law
enterprises in Haryana only.
Right.
Like big companies, IT companies will find a way, will find an exemption or something, but you are just ensuring that any private industry, MSMEs in Haryana have no chance. And then it just is crazy. And also, I think one of the provisions was that the officer who is in charge of executing this responsibility will be exempt from any kind of inquiry or any kind of an oversight. So what kind of transparency or something we're doing here? And also I should add, I'm sorry, it is so harebrained that it makes me like, why, like, we did not need to have a high court say that this is a bad idea.
Correct.
But that's where we are. And Haryana is one of the richest states of India. It is actually one of the most rich state in India among all the top of large states. So after Goa, Sikkim, and Delhi, Delhi, and Chandigarh, it is Haryana. So if a state that has obviously benefited from the growth of IT services, auto manufacturing, and from investment from all over the country and abroad, to take this step is frankly quite regressive and really appeals to the worst impulses that we have, which where the state or the government is not willing to address the broader problem,
Right.
but is much more interested in pushing the can down the road, and in that process making the business environment toxic almost for companies. And see, again, there is enough competition in India, there are enough states that are willing, so the companies would not mind moving
Out of Haryana, yeah.
out of Haryana. Like it may be a short term cost, but the fact that even if it is 30,000, the starting salary of a fresher in an IT company is below that.
Right.
How do you square that circle? That is
Yeah.
just not feasible.
Right.
I'll land there.
No, just to add a couple of things, right? So one is you said about MSMEs and all. In fact, this law applied to any workplace which had more than 10 employees. It said that if you have 10 employees, then 7.5 of them should be local candidates, right? That was the legal requirement. Having said that, also this rupees 30,000 threshold that they placed, I'm not sure. The act allows up to 50,000, but the government decided to fix it at a lower rate. But still, I'm confused. Like, why 30,000? Like, I mean, like I mean, it seems arbitrary to me, but I'm sure there must have been some thinking behind it. And somebody pointed out in jest that, this is government's way of ensuring that all the companies raise the wages above 30,000 so that they are not covered by this law. So maybe that was the unintended intention. So
if this law leads to only high wages without impacting productivity, then maybe we should consider. But given what we know is going to happen, no.
Stay tuned to All Things Policy. We'll be right back after a short commercial break.
Yeah, so but let's look at the stated intention behind the act, right? So before judging any policy, we look at the intention, then we judge the intention against the outcomes, whether they have been sufficiently achieved or not. So the statement of objects and reasons of this act, I'll just read out what it says, right? And I quote: "The influx of large number of migrants competing for low-paid jobs places a significant impact on local infrastructure and housing and leads to proliferation of slums. This has led to environmental and health issues which have been acutely felt in the urban areas of Haryana, affecting the quality of living and livelihood. Therefore, giving preference to local candidates in low-paid jobs is socially, economically, and environmentally desirable, and any such preference would be in the interests of the general public." Now, this is mind-boggling, Saurabh. And before I'll hold my thoughts, and I would invite you to comment. I mean, just the language of this seems shocking.
It is. I mean, first when I read it, I mean, I didn't believe that this was like an official bill, but yeah, you quoted like it's verbatim from the bill.
Yeah.
And it is just astonishing how kind of racist and how demeaning it is to migrants that actually have played a significant role in increasing the revenue and income levels of people of Haryana and the state, and also is just completely misjudges the problem and the reasons behind the problem.
Right.
There are slums and all, because again, there is a failure of civic infrastructure, there is a failure of local level governance and planning and all of those things, which is the responsibility of the state.
Right.
It is the state that has failed in its duty to ensure that at least proper civic infrastructure is provided to its people. I mean, obviously, I'm not saying here, I mean, we are given our level of stage of development, I don't expect us to be Singapore, right? So there will be a disparity. There ought to be a kind of richer areas, poor areas, but the aim should be to ensure that those areas develop and become become cleaner and more accessible. Removing migrants will not do any good. And also, I mean, again, we should remember, these are all market dynamics. If there is a need of employees for certain jobs or whatever job, and they are not able to, when companies are not able to fill that from local talent, then they look outside.
Right.
There is no evidence to say that companies are actively discriminating against the
Local residents.
local residents. So this idea, I mean, it's just crazy. And the fact that a state government in India would feel comfortable writing this in the official bill is just sad.
Right.
Like, it's unbelievable, but it is sad because it just shows that the respect
Yeah.
is not accorded
Right.
to people who again play a significant role in ensuring the trade and commerce goes ahead without any problem.
Right. And just to add on, I mean, couple of things here. Of course, like slums, I mean, blaming it on migrants is weird. It's clearly a state failure to provide low income housing or make either sort of like civic infrastructure available. And the other part is, the greenwashing inherent in here. They're saying the migrants come into Haryana and cause environmental problems. I mean, that's just astonishing, right? It's clearly an example of greenwashing. And the fact that this sounds more like social media rhetoric than any informed reasoning behind reserving jobs for local. Of course, there might be situations, I do agree, that you might require certain amount of provisions being made for local populations, maybe say in remote areas or tribal districts and autonomous sort of such governing units, but to have such a blanket provision for the entire state, I fail to see how that can be reasonable, right? Now, moving on, I think you talked a little bit about migration and the discrimination that migrants face. Just to add to it, right now, this bill sort of gave a legal sanctity to such discrimination against outsiders or migrants, so to speak. Now, let's look at, I mean, to just highlight the law in this regard, right now, Article 15 of the Constitution says no citizen shall be discriminated only on the grounds of religion, race, caste, sex, descent, place of birth, resident, or any of them, right? But there's a proviso to this which says the government can make a law as to requirement of residence within that state. Now this is fair, right? If you're trying to employ someone, the government can make a law which says that you have to be a resident of this particular area, say for a particular duration of time or anything. But to stretch this argument and say that all the private employers in the state have to employ only local candidates up to 75% in their sort of respective workplaces, I mean, that's a bit much. And I think the High Court also came down heavily on this. They said this sort of thing cannot be justified because now there is no legal requirement for the Haryana government to reserve 75% jobs for local candidates, but you're sort of enforcing that obligation on private employers. How is that justified?
No, that is not. And also, I mean, even just the math here, the amount of people working in Haryana would be a lot more than the domiciled population of Haryana. So if 75% of all those jobs have to go to people domiciled in Haryana, like, the math also doesn't add up. So it's a law that I think was passed, for political expediency, or in response to the protest of like communities which may have genuine concern of not being able to find jobs or something. But again, the solution should be something that actually addresses the problem, not something that puts a band-aid on the issue and hoping that it goes away. This law, again, it's just bad, and I don't see how this helps anyone. It doesn't help people of Haryana. It will only lead to more joblessness, as companies will not, I mean, would prefer to move out than to comply. It affects the business environment in Haryana. There will be less investments, again causing more hardship to people of Haryana and the government, who will pay taxes, right? And it doesn't help the social fabric as well, because now what we have done, you've painted a target on the back of migrants, that all the problems that are there is because of migrants. And this is, again, I mean, and again, our country, people of India are the ones who are also highly mobile. They go to many different places across the world and become immigrants and become part of the societies that they go and make their home. When we cannot tolerate, and we should not tolerate, racism against us in a foreign country, how is it okay to do that to your own people in the country.
Yeah.
So this is just hypocrisy, because please don't be racist towards me abroad, while I continue to discount the efforts, the contributions that migrants have made to my state. It is preposterous.
Right. And just to talk about the uniqueness of having such a diverse country and drawing labor from almost everywhere across the country, I mean, the court emphatically states that, for example, the private employer being a builder and is raising a multi-storied complex cannot be asked to not to employ a person who is skilled in the work of installation of woodwork, which might come from a particular area of the country, say Kashmir, where this skill has been enhanced. Whereas from another part of the country, labor which is more skilled in setting up the steel frames and buildings are found, that is Punjab. Whereas similar persons with different skills would be more proficient in executing civil work, such as Uttar Pradesh and Bihar. So the court is in fact cognizant of this, that, all skills cannot be locally manufactured, right? There are unique historical, economical, social reasons as to why a certain kind of skill are found in a particular district or in a region of the country as big as ours. And there is no harm in sort of encouraging that. Why do you want to restrict that in the first place? And second, especially when you're not even sure that similar equally skilled labor is available within your state.
And again, you're right. And I think, again, if that labor is available at a reasonable price point, then they will be chosen automatically.
Yeah.
I think this idea that somehow people people from the state are discriminated is just not true.
Yeah.
So I think the idea here is that, again, and we have to remember that we are a single country. We are an independent one entity, where the freedom of movement within the country is one of the basic tenets of that sovereignty and freedom.
Yeah.
If we are now restricting the movement of people on something which is, again, expressly prohibited in the constitution, especially states have to ensure that trade and commerce go easy, flow easily between the states. So this is a responsibility, and what it does is, again, vitiates the atmosphere for the country in general. And it, again, if one state does it, whether it is right or wrong or whatever it is, it will just be like a domino effect, as we have seen, right? You said there are many states which at least started this process, and some were successful, some have paused the move. But the idea here is that you are just making it harder for people from Haryana, let's say, to go and work anywhere else.
Yeah.
If somebody, I mean, it's a small thing. If somebody wants to work in a ice factory, or is like a sports person for a snow sport or like a winter sport, should they not be allowed now to go to Kashmir or to some other state to train? I mean, it just makes no sense. I mean, it's I understand it's a.
We sound like parrots.
Yes. I don't know. It just makes no sense. And I thank the High Court for putting in some sanity into everyone who is all gung-ho about this. I don't think there are many who are actually gung-ho about it. I think this was just done, and I think everyone was hoping that the High Court would just strike it down, because it just makes no sense.
Right. No, just to add, of course, like you pointed out, it fuels an anti-migrant sentiment, but specifically calling out low-paid jobs under 30,000 per month and highlighting slums and whatnot, the bill is definitely anti-poor, right? It is targeted at the poor people to ensure that we don't want poor people. Like, you can come and work for lakhs of rupees per month salary in a high-class company, in corporate, in MNC, in Gurgaon, but we won't tolerate any lowly migrant worker coming in from a poorer region of the country. I mean, that's just astounding for a state government to make such a claim, especially when we have been guaranteed some constitutional and fundamental rights in this regard. And also, just on the right to movement across the country and right to reside and settle down, there is no right to movement and right to settlement without right to occupation. Like,
why would you move if you can't work?
If I can't work in that state, right? So those rights would have been rendered meaningless by providing a local reservation in private sector employment like this. Thanks again, Saurabh, for this lively discussion today on this law. Of course, we don't have any policy solutions to offer in today's episode. The only solution is perhaps, please don't repeat this.
Yeah, please don't. I think if states try to not do this, I think that will be a very, very good contribution to India's growth, that at least don't stymie the growth that is happening.
Yeah.
at least don't make things worse.
Yeah.
If things cannot be made better.
Yeah. And economic migration is necessary for India's growth story.
Definitely.
Yeah. So thanks once again, Saurabh. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in. I hope you had a fun episode. And we hope to be back on All Things Policy again.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.